everyone, welcome back to another video where today I thought I'd do something a little bit different. As you know, we're on the cusp of a new era, and with a new era comes new designs for various different things, including, and probably most prominently, monster redesigns. But where do these designs for monsters actually come from? Well, I wanted to go over some of the concept art for Cybermen throughout the years and kind of give you my opinions on them, how the Cybermen have changed and evolved over time, and perhaps, you know, where I think maybe the concept art was better or where I can see improvements that were made, etc. And yeah, this is just going to be a grand old celebration of concept art, so if you enjoy that sort of thing, feel free to subscribe, sit back, relax, and enjoy. So the first concept art we're going to be looking at is concept art for Rise of the Cybermen. So this is the first time that the Cybermen were seen in the new series. And spearheading the redesign were artists Matthew Savage, Dan Walker and Alex Fort, as well as Neil Gorton. So this first design is one of Dan Walker's early designs for the Cybermen, and you can sort of see here, already we're seeing the blue lights, which would later become a staple in various new Who designs since. So it's interesting to actually see that this sort of blue light concept was one that was kind of being seen in concept art as early as the early 2000s. Especially the fact that this almost looks like an early Iron Man suit, which is interesting because this actually predates the first Iron Man film. In terms of the design, I do quite like it. One thing I do like, and is, in my opinion, reflected well in the final design, is the sort of bulkiness and weightiness to this. This really feels like what humans would make if actually tasked with making the Cybermen a reality. The handlebars are interesting. They almost curve sort of along the side. I kind of in a similar vein to, I'm not even sure, like, they're not even like headphones. They're sort of like metal strands that keep their head in place, which I think is an interesting little way of going about it. You can also see it even early on, this sort of black material that would go in between the Cyberman's joints. That was also seen very early on. Interestingly, the brief apparently said that they wanted to incorporate certain Art Deco elements, as the episode was going to have that kind of setting. It was going to be a contemporary parallel Earth, but with 1940s Art Deco elements in there, which you can kind of see reflected in the final episode with the blimps and stuff, which also coincidentally has concept art drawn by, I believe, Matthew Savage. But this next one, I would argue, is much more similar to what we would actually get to see in Rise of the Cybermen and Age of Steel. This is the Art Deco follow-up made by Alex Fort, and you can see here, again, those sort of black wirings are the things that immediately jump out to me about this design on the neck. They're much more prominent than they would go on to be in the final design. The idea of having large square pieces on the heads is also present from the previous design, but I would say this bears a lot more resemblance to what we would finally go on to see. I mean, the headpiece is almost one-to-one with the actual Cyber's head design. The only thing that's different, I'd say the faceplate is bulkier, and the eyes look more like human eyes, which I think is honestly terrifying. And I would love to see something like that in the show going forward, or in a new iteration. I also noticed that the blue elements of this are no longer visible, and yeah, you can kind of see where this evolved into the Cyberman a lot more clearly. The body shape as well seems a lot less muscular, a lot more similar to what we would go on to see in the episode. But yeah, I like this one, although there is something that I like about the bulkiness and the sheer power that the previous design exhibits. According to various designers, they were going to try and go for a more organic style, with spare parts specifically being an inspiration. And apparently they paid Mark Platt for royalties, interestingly enough. But then they moved away from that and decided go for something more akin to what, like, the Apple shop would make for Cybermen, which is interesting because I've always thought the C branding did have weird Apple tech company vibes, so it's nice to see that that was actually part of the brief as the design process went along. And here you can see Alex Fort's attempt at a more organic design. Now, interestingly, I think this has more in common with the Borg from Star Trek than it does a Cyberman. Obviously, you can still see the Cyberman inspiration, but I do love that if you remove the faceplate, you can see the full face of the converted human. I think that's great. Very Darth Vader-esque, actually, as well, now I'm thinking about it. I love the wiring going down from the head onto the chest plate. I think that that creates this very kind of mechanical, put together by humans aesthetic. And again, you can see the black wiring on the neck, still very prominent. The head shape is probably the most different in this to what we've seen previously. In fact, you can't even see, I don't know whether this would have had the handlebars, but they're not seen in the piece of concept art that I found for this. And I think what gives it the Borg sort of aesthetic is also, I think, the colour looks darker. Maybe that is just to do with shading, but to me this looks less silvery and slightly more black. Another detail I find interesting about this is the weird spikes on the head, implying that the conversion process for these boys in particular would be extremely gruesome. This next one is by Dan Walker, and you can kind of see a more obviously stripped back design process, mainly just a drawing concept. Now this one's interesting because it seems to be a lot slimmer than previous designs, and obviously whilst it's hard to fully make out the body, you can kind of see that the body, almost to me, in my opinion at least, bears a stronger resemblance to the likes of the 80s Cybermen with the sort of chest unit. And I also think that this Cyberman, with its sort of jagged mouth, looks more angry. There's also in the side of this a more stereotypical version of the Cyberman face, but you can even see the way the lines look almost make it look angrier, which I think is really interesting, and an interesting way to take it. I also personally like, for a more grounded Cyberman, you'll notice that they've drawn on specifically bolts to kind of show where they would be assembled in factories and things like that, which I find really interesting. You can make out slight mechanical hand and arm parts as well, which look more sort of stereotypically robotic to me, as in they're a lot slimmer and they just kind of look like what you would see on a robot, which I find is quite interesting. But I really do quite like this design from a more angrier sort of standpoint. It actually somewhat reminds me of the Flood Cybermen from that one comic. And next up, we have one of my personal favourites of the concept art I've looked at so far, if I can say that. We have this concept art by Matthew Savage, which you may have seen. This was again during the process of creating concept art for the Cybermen, for Rise of the Cybermen, and you can just see how menacing this looks. I personally am a fan of the blue lights on future Cyberman designs, and once again that's reincorporated here. I love the chest unit being most similar to the Tomb of the Cybermen designs. I also love the almost vein-like appearance of the blue wires going across the body, as well as that giant blue laser. The three-fingered hands is more reminiscent of the Telos Cybermen. This kind of, to me, looks like what a Telos Cyberman would look like if it got like Iron Man tech, or like basically just really advanced tech. I'm noticing these sort of side parts which look more like, I guess, vials that could be injecting power or something like that. That's just my guess on that front, but I really like this design, and if this was to be a design used in the new series, I would love it. Obviously, you've got all the wiring from the Tomb Cybermen, you've got the headlight as well, which is a cool touch, and you've got the handlebars, which look to have more of a piping appearance to them, which I really like. I love this concept art, and if this was to be made into like a modern Cyberman design, it'd be terrifying. Like, imagine if all you could see was the lights lighting up as you get attacked. That would be really, really cool, but this is one of my favourites so far. But yeah, this has just been a little bit of a journey into Doctor Who concept art. Obviously, I've done some research for this video. If anyone knows anything further, feel free to tell me in the comments. I don't get it all right. But please like this video if you enjoyed, subscribe if you do, and I will see you later.